The ambush, the merchant vessel. Meridian's hope drifted music through the silence of deep space like a metal island in an ocean of stars. Her hull was painted in the faded white and blue colors of the Terran merchant fleet, with streaks of rust and repair patches that told stories of countless journeys across dangerous territory. The ship looked tired, worn down by years of service, exactly the kind of vessel that attracted the wrong kind of attention. The lawless regions between civilized space. Captain Sarah Chin sat in her command chair, her dark eyes fixed on the navigation display that showed their current position in the outer reaches. This region of space was a no man's land, far from any government protection or military patrols. It was the kind of place where ships disappeared without a trace, where entire crews vanished into the slave markets of a dozen different alien empires. Sarah knew the risks when she accepted this mission, but the frontier colonies needed medical supplies desperately, and someone had to make the delivery. Her first officer, Marcus Webb, stood near the sensor station with his arms crossed. He was a tall man with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from spending too many years in space. He had served with Sarah for almost a decade, and they had developed the kind of trust that only came from surviving impossible situations together. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of concern that made Sarah's attention sharpen. Immediately, the sensor operator, a young woman named Elena Rodriguez, studied her displays with growing alarm. Her fingers moved across the controls as she tried to confirm what she was seeing. When she looked up at the captain, her face had gone pale. 3 contacts had appeared on the edge of their sensor range, massive shapes dropping out of hyperspace with the kind of precision that spoke of military training. Elena's voice trembled slightly as she reported the information. These were not merchant vessels or independent pirates. These were warships, and they were moving into an intercept pattern that left no room for doubt about their intentions. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but her expression remained calm. She had been expecting something like this ever since they entered the outer reaches. This region was controlled by the Craven Dominion, an empire built on conquest and slavery. The Craven were a brutal species, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and chitinous armor that covered their bodies like natural battle suits. They had conquered 40-star systems in the last century, enslaving every species they encountered. Their reputation for cruelty was legendary. Across the galaxy, Marcus requested identification, though they both already knew what the answer would be. Elena confirmed it moments later. 3 Craven battle cruisers, heavy class, armed with plasma cannons and carrying hundreds of warriors. They were designed for one purpose: to hunt down and capture prey. The main view screen flickered to life without warning, showing the face of a Craven commander. His chitinous plates were dark green, almost black, and his 4 eyes gleamed with the confidence of a predator that had never met anything stronger than itself. His mandibles clicked together in what might have been amusement as he looked at the human crew. When he spoke, his voice came through the translation system with a harsh, grating quality that made it sound like grinding metal. The Craven commander identified himself as War Leader Thrax. His message was simple and direct. The human vessel was now property of the Craven Dominion. The crew would surrender immediately and prepare to be transported to processing centers where they would be evaluated for their usefulness as laborers. Resistance would result in the destruction of the ship and the death of everyone on board. He gave them 60 seconds to comply. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in heavy silence. Sarah could feel the fear radiating from some of her younger crew members. They had all heard the stories about what happened to slaves in the Craven Empire. The work camps were brutal, the conditions were inhuman, and very few slaves survived more than a few years. It was a fate worse than death for most people, but Sarah Chin was not most people. She had been born on Mars during the colony wars, raised in a generation that had learned to fight for survival from the moment they could walk. She had served in the Terran Defense Force during the Outworld rebellions, seen combat that would have broken lesser soldiers, and earned her command through blood and determination. The Craven had made a critical error in their calculations. They looked at the Meridian's hope and saw a helpless merchant vessel crewed by frightened civilians. They had no idea what they were actually facing. Sarah pressed the ship-wide communication button and her voice echoed through every corridor and compartment. She told her crew that they would not be surrendering. She told them that the Craven had made a terrible mistake. She told them to prepare for combat. Marcus smiled grimly as he moved to the tactical station. The weapons officer, a former military specialist named Jackson Torres, brought the ship's hidden systems online. The Meridian's Hope might have looked like an ordinary cargo vessel from the outside, but appearances were deceiving. The Terran government had learned long ago that the best way to protect merchant ships was to make them capable of protecting themselves. Hidden panels slid open along the hall, revealing weapon batteries that had been concealed beneath false plating. Point defense turrets emerged from their housing, their tracking systems already locking onto the approaching Craven vessels. The cargo bay doors opened to reveal launch tubes for missiles that carried enough explosive power to crack a battle cruiser's shields. The reactor that had appeared to be running at minimum power suddenly surged to full capacity, feeding energy to weapons and defensive systems that should not have existed on a civilian ship. Sarah watched the Craven vessels move closer, their commanders still believing they were hunting easy prey. She thought about all the species that had underestimated humanity over the centuries since Earth had joined the galactic community. They looked at humans and saw soft creatures from a pleasant world, beings who should have been weak and easily dominated. They never understood the truth until it was too late. Humanity had not evolved on a kind planet. Earth was a world of predators and natural disasters, of ice ages and plagues, of endless competition for limited resources. Humans had climbed to the top of their food chain, not through strength or natural weapons, but through intelligence, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to give up, even when facing impossible odds. Every generation had been tested by fire, and those who survived passed on their knowledge and their determination to the next. By the time humanity reached the stars, they had been shaped by millions of years of warfare into something that the galaxy had never seen before. The Craven were about to receive an education in human nature. Sarah gave the order to fire, and the Meridian's Hope transformed from prey into predator. The span of a heartbeat, the first missile salvo launched from the tubes streaking across the darkness toward the nearest Craven battle cruiser, the Point. Defense turrets opened up with streams of accelerated projectiles that tore through space at relativistic speeds. The hidden plasma cannons charged and fired, their beams cutting through the void like swords of light. War leader Thrax had exactly 3 seconds to realize his mistake before the first missiles impacted his flagship's shields. His eyes widened in shock as he watched the merchant vessel he had dismissed as helpless suddenly reveal itself as a fully armed warship. His mandibles open to give orders, but the words never came. The second wave of missiles broke through his shields and detonated against the hull, tearing massive holes in the battle cruiser's armor. Atmosphere vented into space, carrying bodies and debris with it. The battle had begun, and the hunters had just discovered they were facing something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The lesson. The second Craven battle cruiser attempted to return fire, but the Meridian's hope was already moving. Captain Sarah Chin had studied Craven tactics for years, and she knew their commanders relied on overwhelming firepower and intimidation rather than actual strategic thinking. They expected their enemies to freeze in terror, to surrender or flee. They had never learned to fight against an opponent who understood warfare as deeply as humanity did. Marcus coordinated the defensive maneuvers with practiced efficiency. The merchant vessel twisted and rolled through space with an agility that should have been impossible for a ship of its size. Hidden maneuvering thrusters fired in complex patterns, pushing the vessel through evasive sequences that had been programmed by some of the best tactical minds in the Terran Defense Force. Plasma bolts from the Craven ships passed harmlessly through empty space, where the Meridian's hope had been. Moments before, Jackson Torres worked his weapons console with the precision of a surgeon. Each shot was calculated, each missile targeted at weak points in the enemy armor that most species did not even know existed. The Craven had built their ships to intimidate and overwhelm, but they had never faced an enemy who studied their opponents this thoroughly. Every weakness in their design had been cataloged by human intelligence officers, every vulnerability mapped and recorded. Now, that knowledge was being put to deadly use. The first Craven battle cruiser was already dying. War leader Thrax watched in horror as system after system failed. On his flagship, his forearms moved frantically across his controls, trying to reroute power and restore shields. But the damage was too severe. The human missiles had been designed specifically to penetrate Craven armor, and they had done their job with devastating efficiency. Hull breaches appeared faster than his crew could seal them. The reactor was becoming unstable, and Thrax knew his ship had only minutes left before it exploded. He tried to send a distress signal to the other battle cruisers, but his communication systems were offline. He tried to order an evacuation, but most of his escape pods had been destroyed in the initial assault. In his final moments, war leader Thrax understood that he had not been hunting prey at all. He had led his warriors into a trap, and now they would all pay the price for his arrogance. The reactor went critical, and the flagship vanished in a sphere of white fire that briefly outshone the nearby stars. The 2 remaining Craven commanders watched their leader die, and for the first time in their military careers they felt something they had never experienced before: fear. The human vessel was supposed to be defenseless. Their intelligence reports had described the Terran merchant fleet as civilian ships, with minimal armament, easy targets for capture. But this ship fought with a skill and ferocity that exceeded anything they had encountered from military vessels of supposedly superior species. The second battle cruiser attempted to close the distance, hoping to use its superior size and armor to crush the smaller human ship in close combat. It was a fatal mistake. Sarah had anticipated this move, and she had prepared for it. As the Craven vessel approached, the Meridian's Hope released a cloud of what appeared to be debris and cargo containers. The Craven commander dismissed it as desperation, thinking the humans were jettisoning cargo in a futile attempt to gain speed. The containers exploded when the battle cruiser entered their midst, but these were not ordinary explosions. Each container held dozens of smaller munitions that scattered in all directions, creating a spherical kill zone filled with accelerated projectiles and shaped charges. The Craven shields, already weakened by the earlier missile strikes, collapsed under the concentrated assault. The projectiles tore through the unprotected hull like paper, shredding vital systems and opening the ship to the vacuum of space. Elena monitored the damage reports coming from the enemy vessels with grim satisfaction. The second battle cruiser was crippled, its engines offline, and its weapon systems destroyed. Hundreds of Craven warriors were dead or dying, trapped in compartments that had lost atmosphere. The ship was still intact, but it was no longer a threat. It drifted helplessly, a floating tomb that would serve as a warning to others. The third Craven commander had seen enough. His name was Subleader Crawl, and he was younger than his companions, less experienced but more intelligent. He watched the destruction of two superior vessels at the hands of a single human ship, and he made a decision that would save his life and the lives of his crew. He ordered a full retreat, his battle cruiser's engines burning at maximum power as it fled back toward Craven space. Sarah considered pursuing, but she let them go. The third ship had been damaged in the initial exchange, and it posed no immediate threat. More importantly, she wanted survivors. She wanted someone to carry the message back to the Craven Dominion and beyond. She wanted the galaxy to know what happened when you attacked a human vessel. Expecting easy prey, Marcus began damage assessment of the Meridian's Hope. They had taken several hits during the battle, but nothing critical. The shields had held, the hull was intact, and casualties were minimal. 3 crew members had minor injuries from being thrown against bulkheads during evasive maneuvers, but the medical bay reported they would all make full recoveries. For a battle against 3 battle cruisers, it was an almost miraculous result. Sarah opened a communication channel to the crippled Craven battle cruiser. She knew some of them were still alive, trapped in sections that still had atmosphere. When a Craven officer appeared on her screen, his chitonness plates cracked and his eyes filled with pain and confusion. She spoke with a voice that carried the weight of centuries of human history. She told the Craven that they had made a mistake that their empire would never forget. She explained that humanity had survived ice ages and plagues, had endured world wars, and extinction events had clawed their way up from primitive hunters to masters of technology through sheer determination and adaptability. She told them that every human ship carried. Within it the accumulated knowledge of thousands of years of warfare, and that every human crew was trained to fight with a ferocity that came from a species that had never known a moment of true peace in their entire history. The craven officer listened in silence, his mandibles trembling. Sarah continued, her words carefully chosen to carry maximum impact. She told him that the Meridian's hope was not a military vessel, it was a merchant ship, one of thousands that traveled the trade routes. If a simple cargo hauler could destroy 2 battle cruisers and an NBSP, a third, what did he think would happen if the Craven Empire actually attacked a human military fleet? She let that question hang in the air, allowing its implications to sink in. She offered him and his surviving crew a choice. They could accept rescue and medical treatment, and they would be returned to Craven space with a message for their leaders. The message was simple: leave human vessels alone. Any ship flying the flag of Earth or her colonies was to be given safe passage through all regions of space. Any attack on human interests would be met with overwhelming retaliation. The age of easy prey was over. The Craven officer agreed without hesitation. Sarah ordered her crew to begin rescue operations, and over the next several hours they pulled nearly 200 Craven survivors from the wreckage of their ship. The rescued warriors were treated with professional courtesy, their injuries tended by human medical staff who worked with the same efficiency they had shown in combat. It was another lesson: humans could be deadly enemies, but they could also be merciful victors. 3 days later, Subleader Krall's battle cruiser limped into Craven space carrying news of the disaster. The survivors that the Meridian's hope had rescued were transferred to Craven custody, along with detailed records of the battle. Within a week, every major power in the galaxy had heard the story. A single human merchant vessel had destroyed 2 Craven battle cruisers and forced a third to flee. The recordings were analyzed by military strategists across dozens of species, and they all reached the same conclusion: humanity was not to be underestimated. The species that had seemed so soft and vulnerable when they first reached the stars had revealed themselves to be something far more dangerous. They had taken their position as prey in the galactic ecosystem and rejected it completely. They had built their merchant fleet to double as a defensive network, had trained their civilian crews to fight like soldiers, and had armed their vessels with weapons that could challenge military ships from empires that had been conquering worlds for millennia. The Craven Dominion officially declared human space to be off-limits to all Craven vessels. Other empires that had been considering expansion into Terran territory quietly shelled their plans. The slave markets that had once eagerly sought human captives now refused to touch them, knowing that any ship carrying humans as cargo would become a target for devastating retaliation. Pirates and raiders learned to give human vessels wide berth, understanding that the potential reward was not worth the almost certain destruction that would follow an attack. Captain Sarah Chin and the crew of the Meridian's Hope completed their mission, delivering medical supplies to the frontier colonies as planned. When they returned to Earth, they were quietly honored by the Terran Defense Force and then sent back out on another routine cargo run. There were no parades or public celebrations. That was not the human way. They had simply done what needed to be done, what humans had always done when faced with threats to their survival. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity had claimed its place among the stars, not through diplomacy or submission, but through the same means they had used to survive every other challenge in their history. By refusing to yield, by adapting to overcome, and by demonstrating that they were willing to fight with everything. They had to protect what was theirs. The age of easy prey was over, and a new era had begun where the children of Earth walked through the cosmos with their heads held high, knowing that any who threatened them would face total obliteration.